Hey everyone, come here. I got a question for you. Do you like aircraft that kind of lean on the feeble side? You know what I mean. The kind of plane that's slow, weak, helpless, ugly, a real pathetic piece of garbage. Yeah, we got some freaks in the crowd. Alright, you guys, step forward. I got a present for you. Get the hell off my video, you degenerate lowlife! We ain't got none of that nasty filth here. Today's video, this one's for the pretty boys, for the guys who style their hair, for the guys who know how to match a belt with their outfit, for the guys who know what the little triangle thing in a breast pocket is called. I'm not one of those guys, but I am here today to tell you about the most beautiful, the most gorgeous, the most... I don't know what that word is. Oh. Okay, well, however you pronounce that. It's definitely that, the most aesthetically dazzling aircraft of all time. I'm talking about the F-86 Sabre. Jimbo, intro, roll it.
Hey, what was that noise?
Jimbo, now. There are honestly zero words in the English language to describe just how drop-dead gorgeous the Sabre is. Seriously, if this plane were a woman, she'd be out of your league and you know it. Just look at this thing. Silver body polished like chrome and striped in gold. Wings swept back and tail fins perked up. And the F-86 is just bathing in 50s Americana. The Sabre looks like it should be parked in front of a drive-in diner, or breaking speed records in the deserts of Vegas, or performing flybys over a city park, all to the tune of... And the Sabre, she'll dance for you. This thing can move and groove. So now is probably a good time for me to switch from talking about how good the Sabre looks and tell you about how good it performs. So everyone kind of gets the gist of early jet engine technology, right? People wanted to make planes go faster. Germany was better at it than everyone else. But by the time they had combat jets, it was very much obvious that the 1,000-year Reich wasn't even going to last 1,000 weeks. And now the two biggest winners of that war hate the way the other manages their money, and they kind of want to fight each other to the death. For the US, the best way to improve their airplanes to stay competitive involves a whole bunch of paperclips. Korea time.
Seriously, stop doing that.
So the early jets were a bit disappointing because they were fast, sure, but that was all they could do. They couldn't turn, they had a garbage range, they stalled easily, and they accelerated poorly. Don't get me wrong, they still swept the rug out from any fight with a propeller plane, but they were not the wonder weapons that some might make you believe. They were mechanically complicated, difficult to fight with, and carried the exact same weapons as the aircraft before them. As it turns out, the solution to a lot of these problems was to take the wings and go... And wow, look at that! Suddenly you can move like a fighter plane. Yeah, apparently wings that stick straight out are just a hindrance at high speed. When you sweep them back, you can actually accelerate quickly and you won't bleed through all your energy with a single U-turn. So you'll never guess what kind of aircraft were dominating the straight-wing jets that America sent to Korea. Oh, good gracious, look at that! It's a swept-wing jet! Oh, ain't that wacky? So at this point in the bar fight that was the Korean War, the Sino-Soviet reinforced North Koreans were thoroughly seal-clubbing the US aircraft for a solid month. The Air Force quickly got sick of these Russian jets breaking ankles on their fighters and dunking on their bombers, so they decided it was time to send in the new guy. Now, Sabres absolutely stole air superiority from the MiGs, there's no denying that, but there have been some, discrepancies in its kill record. Yeah, sorry Air Force, but you did not have a 10-to-1 kill ratio. Over-reporting on kills definitely happened on both sides, but you can't just drop a crippled plane in the ocean and call it a landing accident, then turn around and say, well, I shot the MiG and it flew downward, so it's a kill. In reality, the Sabre's kill ratio was more like 1.8-to-1, and that number goes down even further when Russian pilots were flying the MiGs. But I'm still here to make fun of the MiG-15. And do you know why? It's a twofold reason. First of all, the MiG was better than the Sabre in terms of rate of climb, altitude, acceleration, and firepower. Both aircraft were about equal in terms of speed and maneuverability. The only field where the Sabre outperformed the MiG is in diving maneuvers. The MiGs could have chosen to start and end battles anytime they wanted just by being on top of the Sabres and flying up if they ever felt outmatched. Secondly, take a look at these numbers here. Do you know what these are? This is how many Sabres and MiGs each side had at the time of the ceasefire. Now, having that many more fighters yet not having air superiority, that's pretty embarrassing. Not only could you not achieve air superiority, you couldn't even score a positive kill rate with a 3-to-1 advantage.
We have you 4-to-1.
I like those odds.
But, okay, maybe it's unfair of me to take numbers from when the war was ending. You know what? Let's make things interesting. Let's see what the numbers looked like when the UN had the least amount of Sabres to work with. Oh my god! How are you that bad? You had a numbers advantage of more than 10-to-1, and yet somehow they were the ones on the offense. You had an aircraft that could fly above the reach of the enemy, gang up on them, potentially with an entire friendly squadron for every lone hostile fighter, and yet you still somehow managed to find a way to not pull off a dub. How bad can you be? Jimbo! Hey, Jimbo, get in here.
What? What's all the hubbub?
Have you seen this?
All right, let's take a look. Oh. Oh. Yep. That's pretty embarrassing.
It's pathetic.
Aye, quite pathetic indeed.
All right. Okay, I need a minute. You tell them about the F-86 while I'm gone. Oh, boy.
Okay, give me a minute. I wasn't ready. How do I usually start these things? Oh, right. Variant. Let's see. What the? Why are there so many variants? Early model, late model, Navy variant, Canadian. What's this one supposed to be? Oops, all rockets. Mitsubishi. No, Australian variant. I really can't be bothered. Wait, he's not listening, is he? Okay, good. All right. Saber schematic speed run. Here we go. Gun, 650 cals, 420 mils, 230 mils payload, 5,300 pounds max. Field tanks, rocket pods, sidewinders, nukes, go nuts. Radar, not really. Power plant, 6 or 7,000 pounds of thrust. Top speed, 600 knots. Service ceiling, 50,000 feet. Range, multiple. Time! Whew! Not bad. Thank you. I know. I'm pretty great. All right. Show's over. Get out of my face.
What, he's done already? That was like 30 seconds. Well, get him back in here. What do you mean he's... That's why I told you not to pay Jimbo in advance. Now he's... Alright, whatever. Like Jimbo said, there's a lot of Sabre variants, so naturally they saw a lot of service. Really got to see some oddball conflicts too. They were used by the Republic of China to fight the Communist Chinese and managed to score the first air-to-air missile kills. Sabres were used by Pakistan against India, where it would be fighting alongside French and Chinese jets against British and Soviet jets. I know. Weird, isn't it? It also saw combat in a ground support role, putting down rebel forces in the Philippines and the Guinea-Bissau War of Independence. Go ahead and leave your opinion on any of these conflicts in the comments down below. I'm sure the people of the internet will find your ideas both agreeable and well-informed. That was sarcasm. Stop typing. Idiot. But when you're talking about the service record of the F-86, it almost feels wrong to imagine it flying anywhere other than a patch of sky over North Korea known as MiG Alley. A large part of the Korean War was the delicate balance of not getting China involved. Long story short, they were not good at that. Luckily, China only got involved when we were not at war with China. This is good news and bad news. Good news is no one has to make plans for a full-scale Chinese invasion. Bad news is the majority of hostile forces were now coming from China. So how do you deal with that? Well, you can't, since the war is against North Korea, and China is only fighting on their behalf. So, in order to keep things professional and localized, some ground rules were set up to ensure China that the war would not come to them. Well, UN aviators quickly realized that the Soviet-supplied MiGs were not operating out of North Korea, but were actually coming from China. And they did this very rude thing, where if they ever felt threatened, they would just fly north and cross the Yalu River, knowing full well the UN wasn't allowed to enter Chinese territory. So if you're a Sabre pilot, and your job is to shoot down MiGs, you're probably going to be pretty irked if the people you're meant to fight are just playing ding-dong-ditch with you. You could just let it go, let it slide. Or
you can't just shoot a hole into the surface of Mars.
Yeah, there was one little caveat in the rules that Sabre pilots were very eager to use. You couldn't fly into China, except in cases of hot pursuit, meaning if you see a MiG, you can follow him wherever he goes. And that rule was stretched all the way from here to, well, China. So the airspace of Northwest Korea became known as MiG Alley, a sort of hunting ground for fighter pilots. Sabre pilots would fly into hostile skies looking for a fight, and MiGs would post up at high altitude and ambush the intruders. The MiGs attempted to use China as a safe zone from the Sabres, but that idea fell flat on its face. See, it wasn't young bucks with a disregard for rules that were crossing the border. It was the flight leaders.
Today's subject, unconventional warfare tactics.
They would intentionally bring their flights close to, and often directly into China, in hopes of seeing combat. Squadron mates who were uncomfortable breaking rules or weren't trusted to keep their mouths shut weren't brought along on certain missions. Gun camera footage frequently went missing after battles which allegedly took place over China. Commanders would threaten court-martials for anyone flying north of the Yalu while on the ground. And then, when they were in the sky, they would lead their squadron north of the Yalu so they could harass a Chinese airfield. You were more likely to get scolded by a superior for getting caught than you were for committing the act in the first place. Oh, and the communists? They hated this. One Soviet MiG commander said that the Americans would constantly cross into China, and they'd circle his airfield and attack whenever they saw dust getting kicked up from planes taken off. It got to the point where if they saw Sabres flying overhead, they just wouldn't take off at all. The Saber Patrols would stick around for a while, too. It was extremely common for pilots to go past the safe return limit in their gas tanks. Pilots were frequently shutting down their engines during their flights home in order to reserve that gas for their landings. Sometimes they wouldn't have any fuel at all and had to glide back to base. One squadron leader reported that his unit would make around a dozen dead-stick landings per week. And this wasn't punished either. Pilots who returned home without any fuel were celebrated for their skill and aggressiveness. That was really the biggest driving force behind the attitudes of Sabre pilots. Successful fighters became celebrities. If you got lucky and made the right plays, you'd become a household name with your face and adventures shown and told across the nation on primetime TV. In fact, it's the story of an F-86 pilot that I saw on TV that got me so interested in aviation at all. And it's one of these stories that I consider to be the most amazing, exciting, thrilling story there is to tell in the world of aviation. Seriously, it reads like an action drama movie. Some of you, though, may have heard this one before. Some of you might take it a step further and say something like, this is a ripoff of that show Dogfights. And, oh, okay, first of all, bud, this whole channel is a ripoff of Dogfights. You should have figured that out a long time ago. Second of all, it's my channel. I like the story, I want to tell the story, so that's just what's going to happen. Got a problem with it? Then take a hike, bozo. Last train to Chumptown leaves in like 2 minutes. Kick bricks, doofus. Okay, the geeks are gone, it's just the cool kids now. So pull up a chair and let me tell you about the coolest kid. One dynamite dude, a man's man who goes by the name of Robbie Reisner. Our main man here grew up in the American Southeast and held loads of jobs, many of them related to garages and automobiles. He was also really into horses and motorcycles, so clearly Robbie was a cowboy and a speed junkie, so becoming a fighter pilot might as well have been written in the stars for this guy. He became a military pilot in 1944 and ended up in a whole bunch of incidents, including getting banned from an officer's bar in Panama for vandalism and rowdiness, got in a motorcycle accident and the nurse that treated him became his first wife, and got his P-51 lost in a hurricane over Texas, made an emergency landing in a lake bed, which turned out to be in Mexico, which is when Reisner encountered bandits. No, not those kind of bandits. Those kind of bandits. And flew himself home when the storm passed, narrowly avoiding an international incident. What's not to like about this guy? When the Korean War broke out, he was called up to serve full-time in the Air Force, and this time he was flying jets. It was the 15th of September 1952 when the big day went down. Reisner was leading an escort flight for F-84 fighter bombers when they spotted a handful of MiG-15s. They prepared for an attack run against the Thunderjets, unaware of the Sabres sneaking up behind them. Reisner lined up a long-range shot on one of them, and his gunfire clips the MiG in the cockpit, and turned that fighter jet into a convertible. Naturally, the MiG pilot went evasive and began diving and rolling, putting in tremendous effort to shake off Reisner. But things were only just getting started. The MiG pilot attempted to split us super low to the ground. Reisner told his wingman, Joe Logan, that this would be his easiest kill yet. Well, don't count your chickens before they hatch, because the two Americans were stunned to see the MiG pulling out of a dive by using a dried-up riverbed to squeeze out an extra few feet of altitude. They gave chase and followed the madman into the riverbed. As soon as Reisner got behind the MiG, his Sabre was pummeled by rocks that were getting kicked up in the dust from his target's jet wash. But the chase is still on, and the MiG tries to force the Americans out in front by popping out his air brakes. But Reisner has enough time to react and performs a barrel roll, staying in the chase position. The MiG is staying low to the ground and following the riverbed, and as the fight follows the movements of the river, Reisner is able to find fleeting opportunities to open fire. A burst of his chips away at the MiG's tail, and as black smoke starts flowing, the red pilot shows his desperation. Despite elevator damage, he leaves the riverbed and flies at a mountain, flips upside down, and points his nose up, and when he reaches the peak, rolls right side up and pushes the nose back down. The pilot is willingly putting huge amounts of negative G on himself. Reisner is bewildered, but unshaken. The fighters dive back into the riverbed, and the MiG tries the air brake trick again. Instead of rolling, this time Reisner opens his brakes too, and the pilots find themselves side by side. Robbie looks into the cockpit of the target he's now flying formation with. The red pilot stares back at Reisner, and shakes his fist at him, which Reisner found very amusing. Like a movie, in his own words. Moments later, the MiG leaves the riverbed and brings the Americans over a Chinese airbase where flak is already fired up for the unwelcome guests. Despite being at treetop level over the home field of the most tenacious enemy they've ever seen, neither Reisner nor Wingman Logan have any inclination to cut their losses. They twist and turn over the base until the MiG is flying over the main runway, and then, in the worst way possible, he had nowhere to go but up. He reached the end of the airfield, and as he turned back to stay nearby the protective AA guns, he gained some altitude, and in doing so, Reisner gained an opportunity for a deflection shot. A burst of .50 caliber strikes the right wing and sets the MiG on fire. This guy is now flying a jet with shattered glass, a chipped elevator, a smoking engine, and a burning wing. And yet he still maintains perfect control at the stick and swings his jet around 180 degrees and brings it back low to the ground. Reisner reckons he's probably attempting an emergency belly landing, and as the MiG pilot finally settles his maneuvering, Reisner settles his sights, and before his admiral opponent can slip away, he unleashes the full fury of 650 cals, and as the shredded target falls onto a park group of MiGs, it sets off a cascading, explosive chain reaction. Reisner and Logan celebrate the hard-fought victory, but as they stand at the peak of their triumph, disaster strikes. A flak shot gouges deep cuts into Logan's Sabre. Fuel and hydraulic fluid is pouring from Logan's aircraft, and as he and Reisner run the numbers in their heads, it became obvious that the Sabre stood no chance to make it home. But Reisner is determined to get his wingman out of hostile territory, and he realized that the tailpipe of a Sabre and the nose of a Sabre fit together very well. Reisner put himself behind his wingman and had him throttle back until the two aircraft were performing a fighter jet version of a cheerleader's shoulder stand. Reisner is balancing his wingman's aircraft on his jet intake in order to push him to safety. And it's actually working. Reisner's windshield is being sprayed with fluids, and turbulence is shaking their planes. He has no choice but to back off Logan's aircraft. But he regains his composure and goes back in again to keep pushing Logan into the Yellow Sea. Amazingly, they both arrive at a safe recovery point where SAR units are waiting. Logan tells Reisner he'll see him at base tonight and ejects from his crippled Sabre. Unfortunately, the rescue units are having an argument. A helicopter and a float plane are on station, and they're bickering over who gets to rescue Logan. The helicopter crew won when they remind the float plane that they got to rescue the last pilot, so it's their turn. Now, I'm reminding you that it's 1952, and helicopter rescues haven't been nailed down to an exact science yet. So there isn't a rescue diver ready to go fish Logan out of the water. Instead, their plan is to use the wind from the rotors to fill Logan's parachute and blow him to shore, kinda like windsurfing. Unfortunately, that made it difficult for Logan to swim. He became tangled in his paracord, which eventually wrapped around his neck, and he drowned. After guarding Reisner through his high-speed, low-level chase, after surviving an AA hit, after being pushed to safety by another jet, Joe Logan lost his life to a sloppy accident in his rescue. For Reisner, he's not out of danger yet either. He doesn't have enough fuel to get home anymore. He sets his course and shuts down his engine so he has fuel to make a powered landing, but his calculation is too optimistic, and before he can land, he's out of gas. But he's gotten close enough to glide it in, and he brings his Sabre home with a dead stick landing. What a perfect story. It's got it all. Action, drama, thrills, rivalries, friendships, victory, tragedy, and a grand finale. This isolated incident tells you everything you need to know about MiG Alley. And I could end this video right here, and I guarantee you'd be walking away thinking about how cool Reisner is. But his story goes further. 6 days after this big chase, he shoots down his 5th kill, becoming an ace. And by the end of the war, he tallies a total of 8 kills. He stays in the Air Force through Vietnam, where he's flying F-105s. His squadron led the first attacks in Operation Rolling Thunder. Frequently found himself flying damaged aircraft on missions gone awry. His luck runs out, and he is taken POW for almost 7.5 years, where despite extensive torture, he inspired the other inmates with his positive attitude. He lost a lot of family, both in prison and shortly after his release, and you'd think that would really break a man down to his core, but Reisner, he rises above everything. He retires at the rank of colonel, grows his family even larger, and spent his time in the DARE program and raising quarter horses. This guy has gone through some of the greatest hardships a human can endure, and he's still going through life like a cowboy and with a smile on his face. Just look at the way he talks.
Being a typical fighter pilot, flying that wonderful F-86, we weren't really concerned about these guys. And old Joe Logan was so enthusiastic, he said, "Hey, Lead, you just destroyed their Air Force." The F-86 was my very favorite plane that I've ever flown, which I used to kiddingly call my little sports car.
And that's the magic of the F-86. It puts a smile on your face. You know, we think back very fondly of the 50s, don't we? Well-dressed mobsters, the limitless power of the atom, and cowboy fighter races. They're all good stories, but was it really like that? In reality, the Sabre's combat performance was not as polished as its paint was, but something about the way it looks, the way it moves. It has a certain degree of charisma that makes you think even its tallest tale might just be true. Alright, that's a wrap. Hey, before I go, I just want to give my thanks to the Warbird Heritage Foundation. You know, they're not actually a museum, they're a private collection, meaning this Sabre and all the other aircraft you've seen in the background are owned by and kept in flying condition by ordinary people on their own time and dime. And they've let me come into their hangar and screw around with their planes. That is already insanely generous of them. And when I asked them how viewers like you could give their support, all they said was to check out the stuff they post on their sites. That's it. These guys really are just doing this for your entertainment. So please, check them out and show them that you appreciate what they do. Tell you what, I really appreciate that Sabre. God, what a good-looking plane.